You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today's topic is dynamic movie duos. And now, here's Julian, Arthur, and Steve.
Thanks, Mike. I was thinking about this subject all week because there's a lot to pull from. There was a time when we had really dynamic duos. And I wanted to jump in because I remember really being an ardent moviegoer in the early 1960s. I've lived most of my life in Southern California. This is the land of the sun and the beach. And American International was a major distributor of independent movies, and they decided they wanted to make a series of beach movies, starting in 1963 with a movie called Beach Party. Now, you show a movie poster with girls in bikinis and guys in shorts, and there's a big audience for that. And I went, like a lot of my brethren and my sisterin, and I saw Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. They were a thing, and I love them. Do you guys remember them at all?
Oh, I certainly remember them. I remember them to make sure I didn't go see them.
They were that good, huh?
Yeah, but remember, I'm older than you, so
not that much older.
Well, old enough to know this was not what I was interested in.
Of course, you're also an East Coaster. What do you know from the bikini beaches of Southern California?
Well, that actually is very true. One of the biggest problems, and my friend Arthur and I have discussed this, was I was pretty good at picking movies, but I could not get into American Graffiti. I was a Lords of Flatbush guy on those movies, but we don't want to go into that. It is true. East Coast, West Coast, there are a big difference in many ways.
You guys stand online, we stand in line. Enough said.
No.
Arthur?
Well, Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello, they made a lot of money. American AIP was a very profitable company for two guys named Sam Arkoff and Jim Nicholson. And they came up with that idea. And what you left out, I think, Steve, is that they would inject different people into these little movies, like Don Rickles or Buddy Hackett, and they'd have Harvey Lembeck.
Harvey Lembeck, exactly.
Harvey Lembeck.
He played a motorcycle gang leader named Eric Von Zipper.
Right.
And he was great.
But they made those movies in 14 days down in Zuma Beach. And they were highly profitable. The script didn't make much sense. Nothing made sense, but it was eye salad and a little word salad for the kids. Very successful. Martin and Lewis, of course, preceded that. And they were probably, Julian, I would think that for Paramount, they were as profitable as anybody. Martin and Lewis.
No question. But let's get to romance. Let's get to real romance here. I feel that Cary Grant, in our time, did the most romantic movies and he dealt with the biggest female stars. He was terrific. I guess the closest thing today to Cary would be George Clooney. Really good looking, the ability to do comedy and to play with people. So Cary Grant ended up doing a couple of movies with Ingrid Bergman, two of them terrific. One of them being Notorious, one of the best Alfred Hitchcock's movies, and another called, I guess it was, just went blank. But anyhow.
Indiscreet, maybe?
Indiscreet, thank you. And here's the interesting thing about Indiscreet. It was directed by Stanley Donen, who was also known as a great musical director, but he did a lot of straight ones like Charade and Bedazzled. But in Indiscreet, he kind of broke the rules. He was able, even though there was a prohibition to put stars in the same bed, even if they were married, he found a way to do it. He had a split screen. They were both in beds, and they did their scene, and it passed the censors. So that was one of the clever ways he got by with his romance.
Do you find it amazing today to think that there were literally decades of media where you couldn't show a couple in bed?
Shocking. It is shocking. Yeah.
I know that Lucy and Desi on the I Love Lucy show never shared a bed either. That was, that's very true.
Well, that's what they had, the code. They had, this is a puritanical country. It's an amazing amount of hypocrisy. While they were not showing two people in one bed, they were showing all kinds of other things in 1920s movies or 30s.
By the way, on the next screen over, they'd show somebody walking into a garage with a couple of machine guns, and they'd shoot up all these guys against the wall in cold blood, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But in the next place, they couldn't show a couple in bed. Shows you the hypocrisy of violence over sex.
We had a movie that Roger Corman produced that we distributed in New England called Bloody Mama. Shelley Winters. I think Shelley Winters and whatever. There was a nude scene in the movie, or there was whatever the case may be. Providence, Rhode Island would not put the title into the theater section, wouldn't put bloody, so it was blank mama. So I had to wind up calling the person who was in charge of the theater department in Providence. And he said, we just don't use that word. I said, but that word, I just checked your newspaper, is in the front part of the newspaper 7 times. There was a bloody killing in Cranston, Rhode Island. The blood was right. He said, yeah, but we don't do that in entertainment. So you got to think about things like that and shake your head, right? What are you going to do?
It's true.
So Blank Mama did business, just so you know that.
One of the things that I loved about Cary Grant was, getting back to him quickly, was that all these incredible women he played opposite, in Grace Kelly and Eva Marie Saint and Audrey Hepburn. And at the end of his life, he decided to stop making movies, and he went around college campuses showing his films and lecturing. And one of the reporters said to him, my God, it must be incredible to be Cary Grant. And Cary Grant supposedly answered, even I'd like to be Cary Grant.
Well, but there's never been anybody quite like him before or after. There's no one, even George Clooney Gray. No.
Well, he was so versatile. He could do the farcical comedy. He could do sophisticated comedy. He could do light drama.
What were the teams of people that he played with, Julian and Steve? Who were the girls, the ladies that they paired him off with to get these duos?
Besides Grace Kelly and Eva Marie Saint, and we said Ingrid Bergman, Irene Dunn, 4 movies with Katharine Hepburn. Philadelphia Story, Bringing Up Baby, Holiday, Sylvia Scarlett. Every top woman wanted to be with him and wanted to be, because he, as Steve said, he could do everything.
Hollywood, always looking for something that will do business. The moment they see chemistry between two people, whoever they may be, they bring them together with as many projects as they possibly can. Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. I didn't know they did 4 movies together. But
we know that the ones who really did movies together were Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, who did 9 movies together. And over a 25-year period, they started with Woman of the Year in 1942 and ended, of course, with Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
I want you to, all of us, we want to hear about, so much about Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, and the movies that they did together. But I want to just lead you into that by telling you that Eddie Fisher and I became friendly some years ago. And I knew Eddie late in his life. And we would have lunch. He was living in San Francisco at the time. We would have lunch from time to time there. And I would ask him these questions out of curiosity, what was it like? Elizabeth, how did that all work? So, and he got in and told me, as an example, he found the movie that begat the 9 movies that Elizabeth Taylor did with Richard Burton. Those movies never would have happened if it wasn't for Cleopatra. And the way that worked was, Eddie told me, she was in the shower one morning and hollered out to him, I want to do a movie for $1 million. Find me something. They'll do it. The studio will do it. Nobody had ever made $1 million before. So he heard, yeah, sure, I will, fine. And he's in an agent's office and he looks down, he sees the cover to a script called Cleopatra. He opens it up and it says, her eyes were violet or whatever, her bosom was full. And wait a minute, that's how it all began. And of course, Cleopatra became a reality, broke 20th Century Fox, bankrupted as I understand it, and began her affair with Richard Burton. I'll pass it on to you from there, Julian.
Well, actually, the interesting thing about the movies they made, by and large, were not successful, but they were so hot as a couple that they still wanted to take the chance, because Hollywood knows that if you have one combination that does work, you want, as Arthur said, you want to keep with it. I had a man come to see me named John Cornelius Cream. He had a movie with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor and Peter Ustinov called Hammersmith is Out. I don't think most listeners have ever heard of it, and they should thank their lucky stars. But he did come, and he wanted to play it in Chicago. I had the Esquire Theater, and he wanted a four-wall theater, which meant, as Arthur and Steve and Mike all know, that someone would pay you whatever you wanted if you could negotiate a price for the theater, but that someone, the producer or distributor, would keep all the money. So let's say your theater cost you $7,000 a week, and you wanted $9,000 a week. You'd know you'd make $2,000 a week, and if it was a 20-week guarantee, you knew you had $40,000 if you were willing to do that. That would be a discussion that you would have to decide. Anyhow, he took that deal, and we four-walled the theater, and nobody came. And he had all these weeks to pay. And, of course, he wanted out. And, of course, I wasn't going to let him out until I had another movie. And eventually I found it, and he did get out. But he had enough money to finance the Burtons and Peter Ustinov in this movie.
And no one came to the movie with that cast?
Well, when I say no one, you know what I mean.
No, I did poorly. Yeah. Well, it bombed, yeah.
It bombed. Oh, it bombed. It really bombed. Oh, yeah.
It's because you probably didn't have Bobby Zarin doing PR, right?
Not in Chicago.
Oh, not in Chicago. There you go. Okay.
What's their most successful film? Was Cleopatra their most successful film?
Probably, but it took years, as you know.
Virginia Woolf do business?
Virginia Woolf did business, yeah. I mean, that was their I think that may have been their first film together. But anyhow, it definitely did some business.
No, their first film together was Cleopatra, I think, Julian.
I mean, after Cleopatra.
What about VIPs?
I don't think it did business at all. Or Boom. Remember Boom?
Yeah.
Boom bombed.
I'd say, but they made a very interesting movie that totally did no business. But I loved it because it was written by Dylan Thomas. It was called Under Milk Wood. It's a beautiful, beautiful, esoteric piece. And it was Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, and Peter O'Toole. But again, nobody really wanted to see this esoteric, despite the fact that they were in it.
A side story about Eddie Fisher, which is kind of interesting, because he found Cleopatra and is listed as a producer on it, and because it broke up his marriage, the Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor thing. So not long after that, he's offered 5 percentage points in Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and turns it down because it reminded him too much of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor in the movie Cleopatra.
Ooh,
he lost 5 points in Caesar, and they wanted to play like 18 weeks a year. That was a deal, 18 weeks a year, all expenses paid, a lot of money. 5 points, and he passed. What are you going to do?
But we should say Eddie Fisher was a part of a big love duo before that with Debbie Reynolds, and they made the movie Bundle of Joy, and they were the American couple at one point.
Yes. As a kid, I saw him at the Paramount, and he started singing a song, Man Chases a Girl Until She Catches Him, and the next line you hear off stage was Debbie Reynolds singing at the Paramount Theater live. She was backstage. A girl chases da-da-da-da-da until he...
Hey, I thought there's a rule that we can't sing, Arthur. You broke that rule.
You can't sing. That's the rule.
Yeah, you forgot the rules, Steve.
Humming only.
Not about Arthur, who, by the way, was a professional singer.
Yes, attempted, for sure.
You're amateur.
That's funny, Steve.
That's
funny.
Only even complimenting me.
Only humming. But Eddie Fisher, here's part of the story. Eddie Fisher, Debbie Reynolds, that combination, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, that was really the birth of paparazzi guys. That's where it all started. the mid-late 50s into the 60s, and whatever you see now begat right there.
That's right.
Well, I would like to bring up a group that actually predates me, but I discovered them on television. And I have to get into Abbott and Costello. Because Abbott and Costello, I mean, as a kid growing up, they just were funny as funny can be. And I remember seeing one of their more famous films later in their career, but Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, which, interestingly enough, put the kibosh on horror films for probably about 12 years because nobody could take them seriously after seeing them lambast them in their comedy, although there obviously were some horror films done in England. But I was reading up on Abbott and Costello. Did you know that they were the highest paid entertainers during World War II?
I did not.
They were big time. And they had actually made, they go all the way back to the 1930s. They actually made their really pro debut in a burlesque theater, or a burly Q theater, as they say in Oklahoma. In 1935, the El Tinge Burlesque Theater on 42nd Street, they made their debut. Abbott actually replaced Lou's regular partner that night, and his wife, I guess Abbott's wife, convinced the group to stay together. Their first radio performance was 3 years later, in 1938. They performed on the Kate Smith Hour. And interestingly, on the radio, apparently Abbott and Costello's voices were very similar. And there was they were concerned about differentiating. That's when Costello developed a little bit more of a high-pitched, childlike voice. And that was very distinguishable from Abbott's. And they made their film debut in 1940. They made their film debut in 1940, One Night in the Tropics. But their big hit that really turned them into a major force was 1941, pre-Pearl Harbor. They did a movie called Buck Privates.
Yeah.
Huge, big success, and it launched their career. And they were off and running. They specialized in service comedies. They did In the Navy and Keep 'Em Flying. So they covered all the branches. And in 1942, they were the biggest box office stars in the country. And then so there was some tragedy. Costello developed rheumatic fever, was knocked out of the business for 6 months. And then his little son, his 1-year-old son, drowned in the family swimming pool. Such a tragedy for Lou Costello.
Steve, the magic of Abbott and Costello. Could Costello have done it without Abbott? Could Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis done it without each other? The answer is no. They had a magic between themselves. But the truth be told, Lou Costello probably could have done it with any straight man. But Bud Abbott, there wasn't much magic to Bud Abbott.
He was the straightest of straights, I guess you could say.
But his timing, when we always talk about timing, he came in right. When we're watching it, it's going back and forth like a good ping pong or tennis game. So I think he was a pretty good straight man, as Carl Reiner could be for Mel Brooks, for example.
I'm a kid, and my family is vacationing in Miami Beach. I'm 9 years old. We're walking by the back of a theater on Collins Avenue, big theater. And I didn't know nothing about Abbott and Costello in terms of they were appearing there, but they were. And my grandmother has me by the hand, and as we pass the alley to the back of the theater, she says, "That man looks familiar. Who is that man?" And outside in the alley of the theater, backstage, I'm sure, is Bud Abbott smoking a cigarette. So she says, "Let's go say hello. It'll be good, you know." So we go up to say hello. He said, "What do you want, an autograph?" So I said, "Yeah, I'd like an autograph. I've seen him in movies." So he says, "Give me something to write on. I got a pen in my pocket. Give me something." The only thing we had was a $5 bill. My grandmother had a $5. And he signed the $5 bill. He said, "Thanks a lot, and I'm going to finish my cigarette." That was Bud Abbott and Arthur. That was it. But they were appearing there doing well, of course.
We need personal stories like that. Those are important to us.
All I want to know is, where's that $5 bill today?
With my grandmother in heaven.
I want to do something. We've talked already about Cary Grant and how great, and the Burtons and how much, and the romance and everything. But I want to talk about three offbeat kind of romances of sort. Number one, Gene Wilder and Peter Boyle in Young Frankenstein. Now, this is this man loved his monster. He loved his monster. And I think Putting on the Ritz has to be one of the greatest musical numbers in all movies. What do you guys think?
Without question.
Yeah. Without question.
It stands alone.
Yeah. Then you have a second one. I have three for you. The second one, little young Bud Cort and little old Ruth Gordon in Harold and Maude. Another incredible romance. Strange, offbeat, but fun, wouldn't you say?
Very, very, very.
We booked Harold and Maude and The King of Hearts in the Central Square Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it played for 8 years.
My God.
That double bill. You know that, right, Julian?
I knew that.
That's a historic story.
I launched Harold and Maude from Paramount at the Coronet Theater. We died. When I say died, we did it at Christmas time, where you can't miss. If the three of us went on stage at Christmas, we would have done better than Harold and Maude. But
why do you think that is, Julian?
It took a while, Steve. It took a while. I remember it played 30 some odd weeks in St. Louis, and then I think it was Denver played 30, 40. But Arthur's story is the story, because to play that long in any theater is really unheard of.
As a double feature, would do the same amount of business every week. Incredible. Ruth Gordon. So I'm on Martha's Vineyard, where my partner and I operated the movie theaters on Martha's Vineyard. Julian was a partner. And we're with a guy who owns the property, little old Yankee guy, quite a guy. And along comes Ruth Gordon and Garson Kanin. And so, hey, Ruthie, how you doing? And I'm Garson, and this is say hello, Arthur, say hello to Roger. We're talking. They're in the movie business. They have these theaters, and Ruthie Gordon grabs my ass, grabs it, and says, "You know, those pricks at Paramount owe me about $80,000. Why can't you get it for me? Can you do something?" Little Ruthie Gordon, and Garson Kanin is saying to her, "Ruthie, stop it already."
So Garson, who is probably the greatest storyteller I've ever met, and I've met some great ones, he was incredible to interview. He could tell you about Charlie Chaplin. He'd tell you about movies. He directed Funny Girl on stage with Barbra Streisand. I mean, his credits are great. He and I really hit it off, and he invites me over to Central Park South to have a lunch with him in a day or two. I go over, and he introduces me to Ruth Gordon, who does almost 100% snub. Now, I can't say 100%, but pretty much couldn't care less, doesn't want to talk, nods and walks away. Okay, so fade out, he does my show, we do it for a while. I'm standing in front of the Radio City Music Hall, waiting for a friend, 2 or 3 years later, and down the street comes Ruth Gordon and Garson Kanin. Garson gives me this giant hello, and they're asking me what I'm doing, and he asked me what I'm doing, how I'm doing, and I turn to talk to him and her, and when I turn to her, she turns away. So, whatever the reason, Ruth Gordon did not like me. I never found out why, and I think I could say I don't care.
But Steve, the answer, what you're talking about, is why that movie didn't do business at the beginning, for whatever, was because it was a young guy, Court, who was in love with the woman who, at the time, she was, how old? Was it 70 or something like that?
70s, but, in those days, 70s was like almost 90s now.
But I bet you that movie stands up today. I haven't seen it in a long time.
I haven't either. And the third offbeat, and then I'll be off the offbeat track, was A New Leaf, where Walter Matthau absolutely is broke. He lost all his money. He's rich, and he meets this rich woman, and he decides, Elaine May, that he's going to do her in. And by the end of the movie, he's fallen in love with her. So these are 3 offbeat love stories that are unusual, and then we can go back to our usual.
Oh, Matthau and Jack Lemmon, there's a dynamic duo of movies.
Oh, yeah. And they started relatively late. I mean, The Odd Couple was made in 1968. So their 8 movies together came in the latter part of their career.
Fortune Cookie was earlier than 68, Steve.
Oh, no, you're right. It was 66. So they started in 66. They went to 98. They did 8 films. And they're delightful together. I mean, Walter Matthau, They're both brilliant actors, but Walter just had something. Of course, he was with other people.
His face, and his voice, and his posture, He and George Burns in The Sunshine Boys is just one of those movies that you just fall on the floor laughing to them. And Tom. Somebody asked. I think we may have discussed this with Steve Gutenberg, but somebody asked Walter Matthau, who was a known gambler, compulsive gambler, "Are you really a compulsive gambler, Walter?" And he said, "Well, you're talking to a guy who just lost $500,000 betting exhibition baseball."
Oh my God! I want to hear from the youth of our group here, Michael. Give us one of your favorite duos.
We had talked about it off the air, and one of them that love would have to be, you already brought up Gene Wilder, but what about Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder?
Oh, yes.
And also, while we're at it, Mel Brooks and Madeline Kahn, because Madeline appeared in quite a few of his movies, and the connection between the two of them was wonderful because Madeline, she could do anything.
She was one of probably the greatest comedians that ever lived. In High Anxiety, she stole a scene with just a move of her head. When he snaps the cord down and he's singing, she was great.
Mel went back with Gene to Anne Bancroft doing a play on Broadway called Mother Courage, and Gene Wilder was in it. That's how they met, through Anne Bancroft. And when they did that, if you look at Mel Brooks's films, my opinion, the three best movies he ever made were involved with Gene Wilder. It was Producers, Blazing Saddles, and Young Frankenstein. I don't think anything that else he ever did came close to those three movies. And without Gene Wilder, as good as he is, he was better with Gene Wilder, clearly.
I always believe that High Anxiety is an underrated movie. Very funny movie. Also underrated was a silent movie.
Silent movie was wonderful.
Yeah.
Would you agree that they didn't do as well as the three we're talking about?
Of course. No, I understand. No. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those three you mentioned are his most popular.
I would like to pivot with Wilder as my ace and move him in with Richard Pryor. Wilder and Pryor did some wonderful movies together.
Starting with Silver Streak.
Silver Streak, exactly. Yep. And then Stir Crazy?
Yes, Stir Crazy.
And they just talk about the timing. They played off their strengths, and especially in Silver Streak when they meet, when Gene gets thrown off the train and he has to steal a police car, and he steals the police car. He's driving down the road, and Richard Pryor is in the back seat. He's a thief who's been captured. That's their dialogue. You just bounce quarters off their dialogue, and they're so funny together, especially when they arrive at the airport. And Gene sees his pictures all over the airport, and he says, "That's my driver's license picture. I hate that picture."
I think that of course, they were very successful, to say the least. But we're deep enough into this conversation about dynamic duos of Hollywood, and yet to have mentioned Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. How special does it get, guys?
True. Absolutely true.
Some of the greatest songs in the American songbook, Yeah.
They always say that Ginger matched him step by step, dancing backwards in high heels.
Yes.
Pretty impressive.
But they were doing movies that had songs written by people like Cole Porter and Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern. And Fred Astaire probably introduced more classic hit songs than anybody. And his voice wasn't Sinatra's, obviously, but he was so easy to take, and they were great, uniquely great.
And the composers loved him. They knew he wasn't like Sinatra, but they loved him because he knew how to put over their song the way they heard it. Yeah. I'll tell you, I kind of compared Cary Grant a little bit to George Clooney, and I'd like to compare, in a romantic sense, Tom Hanks to James Stewart, because Hanks did Splash with Daryl Hannah, and of course he did Sleepless in Seattle with Meg Ryan, and then of course he was also doing Forrest Gump with Robin Wright. So three beautiful actresses, and He was the romantic lead, and while Sleepless in Seattle we know is a remake of Love Affair and Affair to Remember, it's still one terrific romantic film.
But Julian, you're right. But I think when you look at the Tom Hanks Meg Ryan combination, it didn't get better for romantic comedies. You've Got Mail. She, of course, had done one with Billy Crystal, a great movie, When Harry Met Sally.
The chemistry between those two.
Great movie. She was great. I mean, they just tried again, and unfortunately, the picture's not working. She just did a movie with, help me out, Steve. It just came out and unfortunately did not work at the box office. But
well, it's right. You're right, Arthur. I mean, Meg Ryan on those three movies of You Got Mail, Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle.
Can't get better.
Well, she was, for a while, the American gal in movies.
But together with Tom Hanks. Can't get better.
That's right.
Yeah, that's perfect. What others, guys?
Her current movie, by the way, just so we know, she's directing it, and the title of that movie, just so we know, is called.
Well, it just came out a couple of weeks ago.
What Happens Later, I think, is the title. Yeah.
Yes. Who is the guy in it?
It's David Duchovny.
Yeah, David Duchovny.
Right now.
Yeah, it'll do well. It'll do well streaming. You watch.
I wanted to comment for a second on Astaire and Rogers. Those movies were made at a time when couples went out dancing, and they danced in restaurant clubs where there was a huge dance floor and people were doing couples dancing. And the fact that Astaire and Rogers were doing it magnificently, it was a product of the culture. Today, how many couples go out dancing anymore, especially over 30?
How about the clothing they wore, Steve?
Oh yeah, they were in formal wear. They were in dresses and suits and stuff like that. People got on airlines dressed in suits in those days.
No, everything was different, and there was no television, so that was another reason to get you out of the house. Right now, of course, between computers and television and cable, there's no reason to leave.
But those movies that they made played perfectly on television when their time came. They still play to this day, obviously. I mean, they're perfect for that screen. They're comfortable movies. There was always a butler, Edward Everett Horton, or one of those guys, Eric Blore. Those are great movies, and they're great to this day.
Or Cuddles Zakal. Remember Cuddles Zakal? S.C. Cuddles, exactly.
Who else did Fred Astaire partner with? Rita Hayworth?
He partnered with Rita Hayworth. Barry Chase. Gal named Barry Chase later, yeah, and Rita
Eleanor Powell,
another one.
Rita Hayworth was fantastic.
Yeah,
in terms of charisma on stage, Singing in the Rain is such a classic for so many reasons. But the moments in Singing in the Rain when Gene Kelly and Sid Charisse are dancing just palpitated with sex, excitement, and fun.
Yeah,
it certainly did. Now,
but I liked more with Debbie Reynolds and Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor. That scene where they're dancing down the steps. Good morning, good morning.
Good morning. I'm not going to sing. Sorry.
Stop it, Steve. Stop it. I'll have to edit that out.
I want to put on my Stetson right now. I'm not going to sing because I'm not a singing cowboy, but I'm going to put my Stetson on and I'm going to pull up my boots and I'm going to mention John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara.
Oh yeah.
They if you see their romantic scenes in A Quiet Man, they are off the charts. And interestingly, in one of her autobiography, Maureen O'Hara once said that Wayne described her as one hell of a guy. Interestingly, which she considered a compliment because she grew up as a tomboy. Although I can't picture that voluptuous Maureen O'Hara as a tomboy. She said he was gentle and wonderful and tough and strong, and they made 4 other movies with each other. They made Rio Grande, which was the third of John Ford's Cavalry trilogy. They made Wings of Eagles, where he played the American screenwriter Spigweed, and they made McClintock and Big Jake. And they were a combustible couple.
Let's stay with McClintock for 1 second. It was funny. It was a United Artists movie, and one of the guys at UA could not pronounce that word. It always came out McClintock. But the historical part of it is It was playing in the RKO Keiths in Washington, D.C., when JFK was assassinated, and they had the funeral march went right by that theater, and right up there it said McClintock, as the guy said McClintock, and became famous and is marked in history because those pictures and video are still all over the place.
You know what was playing on the theater marquee when they captured Oswald in that theater?
You give me a hint. I do know. I know that.
I think it's a Van Heflin war movie called Cry of Battle, 1963.
Tab Hunter in that?
Maybe.
I thought you'd reverse it and call it Battle Cry.
No, that was 1955. That was 8 years earlier.
Later. Well, we should mention in the more current world we live in that the Twilight series with these young guys and kids, Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart, really caused a sensation. And so at least we have one young group that we can point to that is current today, or reasonably current.
Also,
you have to realize, though, those movies are almost over 10 years old, dude.
That's to me current.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting. There's a term that's come about the last decade, which has become popularized. It's called bromance. And bromance doesn't necessarily mean a sexual relationship or a homosexual or whatever. It just means that the guys are really into each other. And I have to say that if you saw the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the relationship between Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn and Orlando Bloom's Legolas the Elf is one of the great bromances of all time. They're a team. Now, I know John Rhys Davies plays little Gimli, the dwarf, and they're more of a trio. But there are moments in the second movie, The Two Towers, where you think that Aragorn is dead, but he arrives at Helm's Deep and he's very much alive, and he's confronted by Legolas. I was ready for him to kiss him.
that one of the longest running combination, perhaps there's two of them, would be Gary Marshall. Every movie he ever made had Hector Elizondo. He was his lucky charm. Every one of them, he was in there.
So you want to pay Gary Marshall / Hector Elizondo?
Hector Elizondo, make them a team. But he was in every one of his movies.
Yeah.
The other one, there's a gentleman, I don't know his name, but Barry Levinson, every movie he made, there was a little spot part like Hitchcock would be in a movie, a little cameo for this gentleman who I think was his teacher in high school. Every one of those movies. So there are these good luck charms to different people too. It's a dynamic duo. I have a question. Nichols and May, popular certainly as whoever, Martin Lewis, any Burns and Allen, Nichols and May. They never made a movie, Julian, or did they?
Well, they never made a movie as performers, but Elaine wrote Birdcage and Mike directed it.
Yes.
Wrote primary colors and Mike directed it. So they really kind of came back together. They also did performances occasionally. One at on Broadway. They did the very first AIDS benefit on Broadway with Joan Rivers, and Randy Newman.
What's surprising is they were so hot from television and the theaters where when they were performing.
And they played for
those studio came to them and set up a script for them, to make a movie.
Yeah, I don't know if they wanted to do that, but they actually performed for Jimmy Carter at his inaugural, and they went out for Gene McCarthy. So they did got involved a little bit in performing, but not.
Well, they did television, and then you produced that stuff, and some of the funniest things I have ever seen.
Yeah,
when he goes to the funeral parlor and she's sitting there and asks him, "You tell it, Julian. You want any extras?"
The funeral parlor is the fact that it turns out that she introduces herself as the grief lady. She's the grief lady.
Grief lady.
To take care of him. And she wants to know, he says that he's lost a loved one. And she says, okay. And he says, I read about your funeral is $99. And he said, yeah. And she said, well, the first question is, would you like a casket?
Right. Those are the extras, right?
Anyhow, but I want to talk about, we talked about romances and duos. Let's talk a little bit about some great gay duos that were in movies. And we start out with The Birdcage with Nathan Lane and Robin Williams, terrific.
They were extraordinary together. When Robin Williams is telling Nathan Lane that he's got to turn into John Wayne, it's one of the great moments of all time.
That's right. And then, of course, Brokeback Mountain, we should mention, with Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger. I mean, these were pretty breakthrough movies in many ways, and kind of exciting for anybody who wanted to have something representing how they lived on this.
Well, so Thelma and Louise, if going from the other end, you had, of course, Susan Sarandon and
Gina Davis.
Yes. And that was a great story too. And it's interesting because you start getting the representation throughout the movie industry, covering that. And it was just neat to see you getting, the gay point of view, or sorry, LGBT, and it's, having representation, and the chemistry between the actors and everything were great.
Well, there are movies that have incredible chemistry in these characters. None better, in my opinion, than Midnight Cowboy with Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman. Hard to top that performance of that movie. But we're somewhat off the track of combinations that would play in many movies, and down to a place where there's this chemistry between the actress, whatever it may be. Beaches
Right.
was one of those movies. It was a beautiful thing between Bette Midler and Barbara Hershey. Don't know if they came back together again.
I don't think they did.
Yeah.
I don't think they did.
I would like to know what motivated Donald O'Connor in 1950 to start appearing opposite a talking mule.
Money.
I think it was hard for Donald O'Connor, honestly. He was not necessarily handsome enough to be a leading man, but he was certainly talented enough to be an actor, singer, writer. I mean, he could do almost anything. I had an interesting conversation with him once, which I'll make as short as I can. I said I did an hour with him on radio, and at the end of it, I said, Donald O'Connor, you've done it all. You've done movies, theater, television. You're now on Broadway. I said, everything you've ever done in your career, what was the highlight of your career? And he said, talking to you, Julian.
Oh.
So, you can't get better than that.
Who was his partner in when he appeared in Vegas or anywhere in person?
Sidney Miller.
Yes, Sidney Miller.
Yeah.
Was that a man or a woman?
Yeah, you've seen him a million times, Steve. Nobody knew he was never celebrated. He's a great showbiz guy.
And I think he wrote a lot of their sketches and things. Sid Miller.
If you would see a marquee in Vegas, you'd see big letters, Donald O'Connor, and little letters, Sid Miller. When you look at the movie Boys Town with Spencer Tracy and Mickey Rooney, Sid Miller is so young, he still had his hair. And I think poor Sid Miller went bald at about 15.
He wasn't Pee-wee, was he?
No. He had a very distinct face. Look him up. You'll see. You'll know.
I will do that. Before we finish, I would like to bring up two filmmakers who, even though they haven't worked together a lot, they're so iconic with the new wave in Hollywood, and that would be Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And interesting, I learned that in 1993, when Spielberg was doing Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year, he realized that the film on location in Poland in the wintertime, which was very important to Schindler, he had to leave post-production behind on Jurassic Park. So George Lucas came in and supervised the whole sound mix and the post-production on Jurassic Park. So that's what you call a real bond there. But of course, the two of them combined and joined forces on, for my money, one of the greatest adventure films of all time, which is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yes, I think we'd all agree. But I would like to point out, in the history of film and television, there is a couple that no one seems to bring up, but we would all agree was so important to the whole culture. And that's Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy.
It ain't so easy being green.
It certainly isn't. And I mean, they really were able to forge ahead a relationship that we never could forget. We might have wanted to, but we couldn't.
Want to know a goldmine duo? Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. Those road movies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Dorothy Lamour.
Yes. There's also a recent combination that works so well would be Eugene Levy and
Catherine O'Hara.
Catherine O'Hara?
Catherine
Yes.
O'Hara.
Yes.
Those the best of show. Those movies, Waiting for Guffman, they were great and successful too.
Yeah, Chris Guest is the kind of man behind it.
Yes, Chris Guest, absolutely.
Oh, very much so, and especially like Mighty Wind. And they were alums from Second City, and that's where they got their history together. And then they took it after those movies. They also did recently Schitt's Creek.
Successfully, yes.
That's right.
And it's quite successful with that.
Also, for a dynamic duo, did it ever get better than Barbara Streisand and Robert Redford in
The Way We Were? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
And
we have to say Paul Newman and Robert Redford in
Butch and Sundance.
And Butch Cassidy.
And The Sting.
Oh,
Julian Sting, my God.
Oh, terrific movie.
And how about Woody Allen and Diane Keaton?
And Woody Allen and Mia Farrow. All those movies they made together, that were terrific.
Did we mention Laurel and Hardy?
Who?
Laurel and Hardy? Wow. Teams?
This is another fine mess you got me into.
Yes, that's right.
No, I actually really enjoyed the recent biopic about their latter years. Did you guys see it? Where
it was wonderful.
It was really wonderful. John C. Reilly, I think, played.
Yes,
it was John C. Reilly and a British actor. I'm trying to remember. But yeah, no, that was a wonderful movie.
When they made a television movie of Lou Costello's life story, who portrayed Lou Costello?
I did see that, and I'm trying to remember. Was it Buddy Hackett?
Yes.
It was Buddy Hackett, yeah. And I don't remember who played Abbott.
You know, we do have to say two of the best love stories we've ever seen. One was a successful love story with Ryan O'Neal and Ali MacGraw. I mean, terrific. And also Moonstruck. I loved Moonstruck with Cher. And
one of the great movies of all time.
Yeah, one of the best romantic films ever.
I'm still trying to get over Mike's referring to Julian as dude, D-U-D-E. I find that funny. Mikey made it funny.
I try.
I don't know that Julian ever been referred to before as dude. But
I've been called a lot of things, but not that off.
Talk about performers in sync. Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, Back to the Future.
Oh, good.
They're just magic together. Marty, you made it.
Well, another great duel is through the Quentin Tarantino movies was, of course, John Travolta and Samuel Jackson.
Oh, yes. And romantically, Titanic with Leo and Kate Winslet. My God, that changed everything. Everything. Yeah.
Well,
it's pretty amazing. Oh, for FYI, it was Steve Coogan who played Stan Laurel.
Lauren, they were terrific together. Absolutely.
And Arthur will attest to this. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere in Pretty Woman. I mean, these were really giant movies, and not made for lots of money either.
And Richard Gere and Deborah Winger in An Officer and a Gentleman.
Exactly.
Wow, Officer and a Gentleman, Steve. Awesome movie.
Deborah
Winger was so hot for just as some kind of probably more than we remember.
She followed that with Urban Cowboy with Travolta, which was also a big hit.
And don't forget Terms of Endearment.
Of course.
She was hot until I saw her in a movie called Wild and Napalm in a screening room. And that was not the best. What's the best part of it? Wild and Napalm.
You know what was an interesting duo, and the movie was terrible, but the relationship between Jessica Lange and King Kong in the Dino De Laurentiis movie. There was something going on, especially when he's holding her in his palm.
There's no question. I mean, the ape really had it for her. He went ape for her.
That's right. But Steve Guttenberg's impression of Dino De Laurentiis was so right on. Right on. I mean, I just want to make money.
Well, we haven't discussed another film that changed everything in independent movies, Dirty Dancing with Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey. I mean, these were phenomenal movies that cost $1.50.
But when you get the casting chemistry perfect, it always works. I mean, it's just something that ignites. Sometimes who's to explain it? But look at the Brad Pitt, Quentin Tarantino.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He and DiCaprio.
And DiCaprio.
DiCaprio was awesome.
Fantastic.
They were just wonderful.
There's nothing like it when it comes together and works. It's like a double play combination. Think it's ever the chance.
Warren Beatty, Julie Christie, Heaven Can Wait.
Yeah.
Also very strong.
Warren Beatty, Julie Christie, Shampoo, Under the Table.
Yes.
That's right.
Lee Grant.
Yeah.
Lee Grant, absolutely.
Also, we have to remember Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore in Ghost. Come on, guys!
And they're making that little clay pot together. Oh my goodness! Playing to the Righteous Brothers, Unchained Melody.
Yeah, it's something that
you guys remember a movie called Blame It on Rio with Joe Bologna and Michael Caine,
sure,
and the girl who was supposed to be a huge star, who was gorgeous,
Michelle Johnson,
but she didn't become a huge star. But the girl who was played opposite her was called Demi Moore.
Yeah, Demi Moore, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was Julian. That's your friend Stanley Donen.
Yep, it's true, absolutely. And Joe Bologna, there's old Joe.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. How about Marilyn Monroe?
And anybody.
Anybody.
I mean, if Tom Ewell can be sexy, anything's possible.
Well, what would you say is the best combination of casting with Marilyn Monroe? All the movies she made. Would it be Tony Curtis from Some Like It Hot? Would it be Mitchum in Niagara or something?
Well, actually, you mentioned Mitchum, but it wasn't Niagara, Arthur. It was River of No Return, a Western. Yes. But they are both terrific in a movie directed by Otto Preminger, and that's one I always recommend. They're just very, very physically there.
But Marilyn Monroe, who has got to be the sexiest woman that ever was in movies, or God knows, whatever lived, even in a small part in Assault on Precinct. What was the movie with Louis Calhern?
Asphalt Jungle.
Asphalt Jungle. She was in it for 2 minutes, if that. But she came flying off the screen. I mean,
No, it's very, very true. Very, very true.
Yeah, it's amazing when that happens, and it doesn't happen very often. And with Marilyn Monroe, it was extraordinary. And
I asked Eddie Fisher about her, Julian. I said, "What was Marilyn? Tell me." She said, "Well, she said, but she would have liked you because you would have made a laugh." And I said, "Shit, God, I missed that. I could have given her a joke."
Steve McQueen, who is one of my all-time favorite actors, had some very interesting on-screen romances. He was with Natalie Wood in Love with the Proper Stranger. He was with Faye Dunaway in Thomas Crown Affair. Yes, very, very, very palpable.
We missed another team, and that is Bobby Darin and Sandra Dee made a few movies together.
They did.
Successful, too.
Steve McQueen and Ali McGraw, and that was the end of Bob Evans's marriage.
Right, the getaway. Literally and figuratively.
That's right.
I truly hope that if Ali McGraw is listening to this or will listen to this, she will forgive me. But her acting ability was unparalleled. I've never seen anything quite like it. In Love Story, in Faye Dunaway, whatever that movie was. The Getaway. I mean, I can't. I'm sorry, Ali, if you're listening. You were beautiful, but God, your acting was tough. It was hard. It was hard. Would you guys agree, by the way?
Certainly agree that she was beautiful.
Want to be political? Okay.
Goodbye, Columbus, so to speak.
Was Jack Klugman in Goodbye, Columbus?
Was that her father? Maybe her father.
I believe so.
Richard Benjamin played her lover.
Right.
What was the name? What was the name of her brother who became an actual doctor? I believe his actual name was the same as the name in Halloween, Michael Myers.
Oh,
well, this seems to be we've really gone to the bottom of the show now. I think we're ready to say goodbye. What do you think?
I think we're getting close. I think I would like to just mention, since animated films are so popular these days, we have to at least mention Beauty and the Beast. They were a good on-screen couple, very different backgrounds, but they matched very nicely. And how about Lady and the Tramp? Come on, Lady and the Tramp. I've
got a fast story about Adam and Eve. There's a combination, right? Adam and Eve. Hello, guys.
You're talking about the original Adam and Eve?
I'm talking about Adam and Eve, and they're in the Garden of Eden, and Eve says to Adam, "Adam, do you love me?" And Adam looks around and says, "Who else?"
And that is the joke of the week. And we have come to the end of our show. And as always, we're so grateful for everyone listening to us. If you've made it this far in our show, why don't you subscribe? It's free, and we are available on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are also available now on Facebook and Instagram as our audience is building. We appreciate it, and please don't hesitate to recommend us to your friends and family. You can also write to us. We're very writable. It's talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com, and we will answer you if you have suggestions or complaints. We prefer the suggestions, but we'll take a few complaints. And again, we love having you listen to our show, and we appreciate it very much, don't we, guys?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I'd like to just leave everyone with Kevin and Whitney in Bodyguard.
Yes.
There you go.
Great song, too.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Tony.
Do you like ads about podcasts?
You know it.
How about ads about Doctor Who podcasts?
Even better.
Well, you're in luck, because this is an ad about a Doctor Who podcast.
Wow, I love it.
And you'll love us, the Watchathon of Rassilon, a podcast about Doctor Who.
I'll buy 12.
Actually, it's free.
I'll buy 13 then.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.